Hello and happy Fine Print Friday. I have been studying UFO law for weeks since the Senate introduced a bill to declassify and publicly disclose all sorts of records that the government have been supposedly keeping regarding UFOs and aliens and all sorts of stuff we really can't explain. And just this week, there was a really interesting hearing in front of Congress by especially Senator Ryan Graves, who is an Air Force pilot who saw some very suspicious, hard to explain things on off of the coast when he was flying airplanes. He's a credible witness, and he's saying that we have records, we have seen things, and they're behind closed doors in the government, and it's time to disclose them. So this bill is about that, and I will tell you what the purpose of the bill is, what it really means for you, who's making the decisions about what's being disclosed and when it's being disclosed. One thing I like about this bill is that there isn't a whole lot of discretion involved. I mean, everything looks like it's going to be disclosed eventually, and I'll tell you a little bit more about some of the definitions and what UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomenon, means, and a little bit of the timeline of the disclosure. So let's kind of dig in, shall we? Okay, so this is the first page of the bill. It says they're ready to authorize appropriations for fiscal year 2024 for military activities of the DoD, for military construction, et cetera, et cetera. And if we scroll all the way down to the very last page of the bill, it says that basically there's going to be $20 million allocated for fiscal year 2024 from the budget to carry out this act about disclosing all of these records. On the second page of the bill here is where typically they'll say, why are we here? What are the findings? What's the purpose of this bill? And this one says that the purpose is to preserve and centralize all federal government records regarding unidentified anomalous phenomena. Goes on to say, all the records should have a presumption of immediate disclosure. This is something I really liked about this bill. To presume that we're going to release everything publicly unless we have a good reason not to. And it says that all records should be eventually disclosed to enable the public to be fully informed about the history. It goes on to read, credible evidence and testimony indicates that the federal government unidentified anomalous phenomenon records exist and have not been declassified, despite a law that makes it mandatory to declassify those records. And then basically it goes on to say that the Freedom of Information Act that would typically make this stuff disclosable really kind of sucks. It's not a very effective law, and it's proven inadequate in achieving the timely public disclosure of these records. So to be clear, this doesn't mean that aliens necessarily exist or that we have evidence of them. There are credible testimonies and people saying that, look, I've seen stuff, I know there are records. So we know that there are records that need to be declassified, but we don't actually have evidence of aliens necessarily. There might be, there might not be. But there are important congressmen and women who think that there are credible evidence that there are records that we want to disclose. So don't confuse this with an implication that there are aliens necessarily. You have to understand, the people that are writing this bill are the congressmen and women. They don't really know what the records are, and they have a staff that's going to help them write these laws. And they want to make sure that they're covering all of their bases. So it's very broad, and as I get into definitions, I'll point out to a couple parts of this that make it really clear that they're really trying to be encompassing here and make sure that nothing's left out. But that doesn't necessarily mean that, oh, we know that there are evidence of aliens now, and oh, we're going to disclose it. We think there probably is some type of evidence, and we want to make sure that those are publicly available, and that's all it means. So stay tuned, because there's going to be a long rollout period about what evidence and what documents are actually disclosed to the public, okay? So let's get into a couple definitions next, and we'll go on to the purpose and how the board works. It's going to be reviewing the documents and stuff. Okay, so here's a definition of unidentified anomalous phenomenon. I'll explain why we're using the term UAP as opposed to UFO now. UAP means any object operating or judged capable of operating in outer space, the atmosphere, ocean surfaces, or undersea, lacking prosaic attribution. Basically, we know what it means, where it's from, due to performance characteristics and property not previously known to be achievable based on commonly accepted physical principles, okay? So let's scroll down first. I'll show you a few examples, okay? So UAP includes what were previously described as flying discs, flying saucers. I can't believe I'm reading this in a government bill, right? Unidentified aerial phenomenon, unidentified flying objects, UFOs. So, and here's why we're using UAP, unidentified submerged objects. So it doesn't necessarily mean that their objects are flying. They could be submerged. They could be something else. So the term UAP is a little bit broader than UFOs because we don't know necessarily where they're coming from. And then to further, we can't explain based on commonly accepted physical principles. Here are some of those common principles that we can't explain. Instantaneous acceleration absent apparent inertia. Hypersonic velocity absent a thermal signature and sonic shockwave. Usually when we see something go super fast, it's hot, it's warm, and we can tell that it's moving because it's giving off energy and heat, and we can tell that from a distance. But there are accounts from fighter pilots like Ryan Graves that say that, look, we saw this thing go and we couldn't leave and we couldn't tell because there was no heat signature. We can't explain how that's possible. Transmedium, such as space to ground or air to undersea. They keep mentioning undersea. That's so interesting to me. Positive lift, contrary to known aerodynamic principles. There's an account that there was just this object just hovering over the coast of the ocean, and it just like left, like zoop right out to outer space without any, typically it would accelerate slowly, and this thing just took right off. Multispectral signature control, I couldn't entirely explain that. And then also physical or invasive biological effects to close observers. I don't exactly know what that means, but maybe it could blind somebody who was nearby it or make them lose their memory or something. Who knows? I'm just speculating. But if any of these principles are observed, then in the record or the object, then it's probably an unidentified anomalous phenomenon. And when there's an unidentified anomalous phenomenon, there's a record about it, what's going to happen is this bill mandates that any government agency that or body that has any records about it have to disclose these to a particular board that's being created, that's going to review the documents and determine, is this a UAP or is it not, and when can it be disclosed. So let's talk about this board a little bit. So what's going to happen is they're going to establish an unidentified anomalous phenomena, UAP, records review board. And read this. Okay, so the president, vying with the advice and consent of the Senate, shall appoint, without regard to political affiliation, sure, I bet, 9 citizens to serve as members of the board. The persons nominated to the board have to be impartial citizens, none of whom have any previous or current involvement with any legacy program or controlling authority related to the collection, exploitation, reverse engineering of technologies of unknown origin, or the examination of biological evidence of living or deceased non-human intelligence. Basically, that means the people that we're going to appoint to this board can't have been a member of one of the government bodies that maybe had records or saw records and was maybe withholding or not disclosing records. So we want to make sure this person is impartial, so we're getting a fair treatment of all these documents, okay? That's a good sign. They must be distinguished people of high national professional reputation, et cetera, et cetera. And they're going to include at least one current or former national security official, one current or foreign service official, one scientist or engineer, one economist, one professional historian, and one sociologist. They'll get security clearances and a few other things, okay? So what they're going to do is they're going to put these 9 people on the board, and this board, the purpose of them, I'll show you, is to review these UAP records. All these government bodies are going to start disclosing stuff to them confidentially, and then they're going to start reviewing it, and they're going to decide when the documents can be disclosed publicly, okay? And if the documents can't be disclosed publicly, one thing I like about this law is that even if the whole thing can't be disclosed, there has to be an unclassified, like, summary reason of why it wasn't disclosed. So even if you don't see the whole doc, we're going to get a reason why. Let me show you a couple of the interesting things about this board that I really like, because it really limits the amount of discretion that the government bodies can exercise in disclosing the documents. Really, they have to turn everything over. You can't destroy anything. You can't withhold anything. That's not your job. That's this board's job. And the board, over time, will slowly review the records and disclose them. So I really like how this bill is written for that. Let me point out a couple of the important sections that I really think are important, because it's gonna guarantee that we're gonna get all the information, all the records eventually. Okay, example 1 about why this board I think is going to be effective and why there isn't a whole lot of discretion the agencies can exercise in withholding information. Number 1, at the very top, the purpose of the bill, they say that, look, these records are subject to mandatory declassification review per federal law, and they probably should have been disclosed already anyways. Examples 2 and 3. No UAP records shall be destroyed, altered, or mutilated in any way, so you can't cover stuff up. And no UAP record made available or disclosed to the public prior to the date of the enactment of the Act will be withheld, redacted, or postponed for public disclosure or reclassified. This stuff is coming out, and it's coming out now. No more waiting. Example 3, back to the top. Look, it says there's a presumption of immediate disclosure for all UAP records. Okay, so you better have a reason why it shouldn't be disclosed in order to override this, because we're going to assume that it's going to be disclosed immediately unless you give us a good reason. Reason number 4, all postponed UAP records determined to require continued postponement, basically meaning we're not going to disclose them quite yet. They require an unclassified written description of the reason for such continued postponement relevant to these specific records. So even if something is going to be disclosed, we're going to know why. And here on page 49 of the bill, if something is postponed, the review board shall seek to provide for the disclosure of segregable parts, substitutes, or summaries of such a record. So to me, what this means is, let's say that there's a record, we can't disclose all of it. What we'll do is redact parts of it, release what we can, or we'll at least summarize the record and disclose that. And if there are records that are summarized or disclosed or redacted, that even will be a temporary postponement. And the purpose of the bill, the goal is to release everything eventually. So this is a good sign because, look, even if there's a good reason to postpone it, we're still going to give you a summary. It's an unclassified reason, so that's going to be public. And even if we do have to summarize or disclose part of the document, we're at least going to give you that. We'll give you a reason for why the parts are redacted or omitted. And eventually, the bill is going to force that all these documents are going to be released. So it's going to be pretty exciting to see everything roll out. So here on page 27 of the bill, continuing on about why this is actually written pretty darn well, and I don't think there's a lot of funny business in here that would keep records from being public. Periodic review of postponed UAP records shall serve to downgrade and declassify classified information. So they're going to continue to downgrade and declassify it. And then this section says each UAP record shall be publicly disclosed in full without redaction or summary or omission, and available in the National Archive not later than the date that 25 years after the date it was created, unless the president certifies for particular reasons. Okay, so there's like an expiration date of 25 years from the date the record was created that it'll be public. Last thing I like about this law in terms of really giving it teeth is it takes precedence over pretty much every other law except for like IRS, like tax codes and tax rules specifying confidentiality and disclosure of tax returns and tax return information. And that's really about it. I mean, it takes precedence over the Freedom of Information Act. It can be judicially reviewed still. There's all sorts of stuff that this takes priority over, and I really think that's important because if you want people to take this seriously, then the bill's got to have some teeth. And this really says, look, everything's going to be disclosed eventually. This is just a matter of when, and this law takes precedence over any other law. So no funny business. No like subpoenas or motions to quash trying to keep this stuff under wraps. Everything's going to get disclosed eventually. We'll give good reasons why. Like, for example, some of the reasons are if it's a national security issue or if disclosing some of the records might blow somebody's cover, whether it's an informant or maybe like a spy somewhere else, and disclosing the records would put them at risk, or somebody's privacy or personal privacy interests, right? Like, let's say you saw a UFO and there's something private you don't want publicly disclosed. Well, in that case, we'd still disclose the information, but we might redact your name and what your identity is, because we do want to still protect people, because that incentivizes them to cooperate with the government and be informants and provide testimony, etc. But generally speaking, I mean, this really has a lot of teeth, and I think it's really legit. Okay, now a couple more important definitions I want to get over. What is non-human intelligence mean, and what does close observer mean, and what does technologies of unknown origin mean? So let's go first. Non-human intelligence means any sentient, intelligent, non-human life form, regardless of nature or ultimate origin, that may be presumed responsible for UAP, okay? So sentient, intelligent, non-human life form. Could be like, would that be an octopus, an orca whale? Does it have to be an alien? How intelligent does it have to be? What does sentient intelligence mean? I like how they say regardless of nature or ultimate origin, because there are a few times in this bill where it talks about underwater or undersea. Let's look at them. Here we go. Technologies of unknown origin means materials or metamaterials, ejecta, crash debris, mechanisms, machinery, equipment, assemblies, subassemblies, engineering models or processes, damage or intact aerospace vehicles, and damage or intact ocean surface and undersea craft, right? Again, we're trying to be clear here. Look, we think that typically we always thought about flying saucers and everything coming from outer space, but we've seen these weird examples of UAP, of UFOs or whatever on the coast of on the oceans and everything. So is it possible they'd be coming from underwater? Well, again, the people writing these bills have no idea, okay? But they want to make sure they're covering everything. So we're not only going to talk about the stuff that's in the air and outer space, we're going to talk about stuff that's undersea. So that's why you see this definition coming, this term coming up a few times. Again, don't read into it too much. Doesn't mean that there's something down there. They're just covering all their grounds, okay? So they talk about undersea craft. Where's another example, okay? The term temporarily non-attributed objects basically means, that means something we can't explain yet, and that's one of the things the review board will do. Natural, celestial, meteorological, or undersea weather phenomena. Okay, so maybe something's happening undersea that we can't explain. We want to make sure we cover those. More undersea vessels that they're talking about. Transmedium, this is in the definition of UAP. If we can't explain how it could go to air to undersea without any trouble, that would count as well. So these are good examples of why they have undersea there, because again, we're not only talking about stuff that's in the air, but stuff underneath the surface too. Another fun one is this one, close observer. The term close observer means anyone who's come into close proximity to UAPs or non-human intelligence. Now, that seems to insinuate that that definitely has happened before, or that there are people who have encountered, non-human intelligence or things we can't explain. So like this to me is like, what is the definition of has come into it? Close proximity mean? What do you mean has? Like, and under their account, that must be what it means, because we don't know what evidence there is to corroborate their stories. And then under here, this is referenced a number of times in the bill, and I bet you'll hear in the news too. The controlled disclosure campaign basically means the schedule for which the board will start releasing the documents to the public. So to summarize so far, we have this bill, and the purpose of it is to collect all of the government records from the federal government and all the different agencies into one place, okay? Because we think they're spread out at, Area 51, Department of Defense, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to put them all in one place, and we're going to have this board look at them. The board is going to be appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate. There are going to be certain professions and occupations that are going to be part of that board. And by the way, to be a member of this board, you're going to get paid like $182,000 a year. That seems like a pretty cool job. Look out for those job applications for online. Once the board receives the information, let's talk about the disclosure, like the timeline of disclosure and how long we're going to have to wait for this. So let's talk about timeline. This act won't go into effect until 2024, so we're at least 6 months away till anything remotely cool starts happening. Once the act is enacted, within 60 days, the president appoints the members to the board, and then they get voted on and stuff, so it's going to take some time after that. Within 180 days of the board being appointed, they will actually begin their review of the documents. And within 300 days of enactment, every government agency has to give all the documents over to the board. So what's going to happen is we're going to be at least 9 months away before the board starts really looking at anything. And after that, really, we're going to probably get the least important documents first. And then after a while, they're going to start rolling out more and more stuff. But it's probably going to be, I would guess, until 2025, until anything really cool starts coming out. So be patient. And let me show you this one last thing about the in the act. The review board and the terms of its members shall terminate not later than September 30th, 2030. So not later than that. So it could be terminated earlier. So it's going to depend on how many records there are and how long it's going to take them to go through everything. Congress can extend that term past 2030 if necessary. Hopefully they have to, and there's just all sorts of cool, like exciting alien records out there, but my guess it'll be done a little bit sooner than that. So the good news is this bill has a lot of teeth to it. There's not a lot of discretion that the agencies can exercise to withhold, terminate, or destroy documents. Everything is, the goal of it is to disclose everything eventually. It's just going to take some time, and that's a downside here. It's going to take some time to get the cool stuff out. But hey, at least we got something in the works. I'm really happy that this bill is out there. It seems really exciting. The hearing testimony this week was really interesting. I love the interviews that Graves and some of the other for close observers have given on, like the Joe Rogan podcast and a few others. So it's really interesting stuff. It's just going to take us a little while to get to the bottom of it. So thanks for watching. I'm glad you enjoyed the fine print of this bill. You can rely on me to read interesting stuff like this in the future, and I'm really excited about this UAP stuff. So expect more in the future. Be sure to like, subscribe, and follow. Happy Fine Print Friday.